now. Right, okay, so yeah. Thanks very much for coming up. For those for new, like Anya, basically I'll be running these sessions on a monthly basis. Each session will be its own topic. So if you have an idea for the one at the end of July, let me know, and we can cover that one off as well. But obviously today's session is all about investing for children. I'm going to basically scribble on a whiteboard to give some diagrams and things like that, but there won't be any kind of slideshows. I want this to be interactive as possible, so please ask as many questions as you want along the way. I don't want to be talking at you for an hour. But basically we'll get going now, and I'll start sharing my screen. So give me 2 seconds. Power technology. All right, screen monitoring. Okay. It's just downloading something. Okay. All right, here we go. No, it's not liking that for some reason. Oh dear. Unable to connect. Oh, that's annoying. Sorry about this, guys. This hasn't happened before. Oh dear. It's not allowing me to share. Apologies. Oh, I'll have to go back to, hang on a minute. My previous notes. Can people see this screen here?
Yes.
You can, so you can see what to consider.
Yeah.
Right, okay, brilliant. These are some notes that I jotted down yesterday, actually. As like Boo Peter says, this is what I made up earlier. I was going to just draw this on a screen as we go along, but seeing as that's not working, we'll have to make do. Right, so basically, when you are choosing to invest for a child, there are 3 things that you want to really consider when choosing the best option, because there are 3 primary or 4 or 5 really primary options to invest. They all have their own pros and cons, which we'll go through in a minute. But basically what you want to think about is, number 1, when you want to have access to that investment vehicle. Some investments like ISAs, for example, allow the children to get access at the age of 18, whereas others, with regards to junior pensions, obviously they have to be a lot older, and trusts have their own timelines as well. So when you want to gain access is vitally important, i.e. what do you want that money for? Because obviously there's no point in putting money into a junior pension if you want that to pay for school fees or university fees or whatever it might be. Okay. The other main thing I come up against is I want to help my child get onto the property ladder. Again, pensions wouldn't be so good for that. So you'd probably want to start consider some sort of trust arrangement or junior ISA, and I'll speak about those in a bit more detail later on. The second thing is what tax advantages they all give. So when I talk about these different wrappers, each wrapper in and of itself can contain the same investments. All it does is it changes the internal tax structure of those funds or portfolios or stock selections. And again, I'll come on to that in a bit more in a bit more detail in a minute. And finally, who do you want to manage the investments? So, i.e., who do you want to control that money? Because it might be the case that, well, actually, I want to regain control of that money for my child. Because with the best will in the world, if you start giving a child a lot of money at an early age, you don't really know what that person might turn into later on down the line, if you want to read between the lines. So do you want to regain control of that money, or would you rather that child have control of that money at a certain age? So number three, third thing to consider there. All pretty straightforward and self-explanatory so far. Any questions, thoughts on those 3 points?
Can it make a big difference in who's managing those sort of funds? Does that make a big difference at the sort of the start? Is it that important a consideration, or is it just the sort of the terms and conditions that you want to sort of put in place at the outset to make sure that you are mitigating against those sort of risks that you just mentioned?
Well, when you say managing the money, are you talking about the person that's actually choosing the
well, to your
selection?
Well, to your question or to your point, and the structure and how it works in terms of well, I mean, you say it's a point to consider, like who's managing it, and I'm saying, how does that sort of manifest itself as a kind of an important part of that sort of decision?
Well, I think you're trying to cover two things here. So the first thing is, well, who's managing the money in terms of the fund manager actually choosing the investment selection? And obviously that's important in and of itself. You got to pick the right investment strategy. What I really mean by that third point is, who do you want managing that money at a certain age? Do you want the child managing the money after the age of 18, or do you rather manage the money for them? So, i.e., you could have the money in your own name and just have it earmarked for that child. Does that make sense? In which case, you might not want to pick a junior ISA. You might want to have your own adult ISA, so you can continually manage it on their behalf, but it's earmarked for them.
I guess that ties back to the other 2 points as well. They're all
exactly
kind of a bit overlapping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of similar to when you want to give them access. But obviously also, who do you want managing the investments is vitally important, because you've got to, well, it would be prudent to pick as good a fund manager as you can. And obviously that's where I step in. And obviously you three all know that I'm an independent financial advisor myself, and that's something I do, but I won't talk about that. This is just a broader overview of what to look for. So the 3 points there.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Just very quickly. The first one, when we were talking, well, the first question is, what's a junior pension? Is that one that, well, what's a junior pension?
Good question. Yeah, a junior pension is just like a normal pension, but it's got its own stipulations. So you can put 3,800 in a year, and basically what happens is, once that money is invested, it's tax free. So the maximum you can put in is 3,600 a year. But what happens with pensions is that money is rolled up, grossed up by the government. So all you need to put in is actually 2,880. That's the maximum you can put in a tax year. The government then grosses that up by 20%. Come into pensions in a bit more detail in a moment. But exactly, essentially, it's the same vehicle than an adult pension. It does the same stuff. It can be invested in the same things. It's just you don't have that £40,000 limit that you would do with an adult pension. But effectively, it's the same rules, and I'll come on to those in a moment or two.
Okay, so I'll find out a little bit more about that when you cover it. And
Yeah,
the second one, and the second question is just the clarification for me in terms of my understanding of wrappers, because
yeah,
there's jargon I have to get my head around. So you're saying each wrapper can contain the same funds,
yeah.
but depending on what wrapper is selected, will be treated differently by the taxman. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So you can have bonds, pensions, ISAs, unit trusts, OICs, whatever it is, right? All those separate little cups, if you want to imagine it like that, can have all the same funds, portfolios, stock selections in. All that changes is the internal taxation of that money. So unit trusts and OICs, which is open-ended investment companies, are all taxable. You can have a general investment account, which is all taxable. But you don't have any limits in terms of how much money you can put into those accounts. The reason why you have limits for the ISAs and pensions is because they're so tax efficient. But obviously the government needs to make money, right? So they can't offer unlimited amounts of tax-free money to people. So that's when they say, you know, if you once you've maximized your pensions and ISAs, then where do you go? And that's where it starts to get a little bit more complex, because then you could have things like venture capital trusts and enterprise investment schemes and all these other different variables. But I'm just trying to keep it as simple and straightforward at the moment, because all these other tax wrappers wouldn't be relevant for a child. And I think that's something for another day, another conversation. So just to keep it simple. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah.
So coming on to junior ISAs, I'm glad I scribbled all this all out last night, because God knows why my iPad has stopped working. Right, so ISAs, junior ISAs. Now these replaced something called a child trust fund. Child trust funds, they used to give you a government bonus on the way in, but effectively they've now been completely replaced by a junior ISA or JISA. Now, the allowance for this investment is £9,000 a year. And you could think of it as an addition to your own allowance. So you've got a £20,000 allowance as an adult. You've also got £9,000 per child for a JISA. So therefore, more money to take away from the taxman if you're thinking about tax planning. You've got two types. You've got a cash ISA, so ones that would be offered by a bank or a building society. You can go on Money Supermarket, for example, and try and find the best yielding cash ISA. You might be lucky if you get anywhere near 1%, with interest rates being what they are, but they're there. You could have a fixed term ISA. Let's say, you know, you put your money in and it's locked away for 5 years. The interest rate will be slightly better, but you still aren't really going to be beating inflation. You know, we've had inflation figures, people talking about upwards of 9–10%. That's really not going to cut the mustard, but it's going to be safe, it's going to be secure. If you wanted it as a short-term thing, there's nothing really bad about that. You might want a cash ISA as an emergency fund, for example, just as a rainy day fund. Ones that I would recommend highly, because of the better interest rate, is the stocks and shares ISA. So again, you place your money in whatever fund or portfolio or even individual companies that you want. And all that money, as the diagram suggests here, is tax-free once it's in. Now, once the child reaches the age of 16, that money automatically becomes theirs, but is a cash ISA. Once the child turns 18, they then get full control of that money and they can use it how they want to. And then all that money is tax-free. I just wanted to kind of highlight a point before I stop and ask for any questions. Hopefully you can see this screen here. Now, what this basically demonstrates is, okay, generally speaking, if you were to choose a middle of the road portfolio, average attitude to risk, I would suggest 8% year on year, give or take a few bad years like we're seeing at the moment, wouldn't be too far out the question. And I just want to highlight the impact of time. Time is our best friend when it comes to investing and what the impact of that is. Okay, so let's say you invested for a child of day one, as soon as they're born. And obviously, if you wanted to give it 18 years, because that's when they access the money. And deposits, you know, obviously this depends on affordability, but let's say you just did £100 a month. And then what that will be at the end. Does anyone want to hazard a guess in terms of how much that would be worth in 18 years' time?
It's always much, much higher than you think it should be. I don't want, and depressingly so, because you think, oh, I should have put in 10 quid a month. So it's 18 years. 18 years, 1,200 a month. So if it was just flat, it would be whatever, 20,000. So it's going to be like 60,000.
60,000. Well, let's have a look, shall we? 48.
48. Okay,
So
I was over
almost.
Yeah, I mean, we're considering that's doubling your money.
Yeah,
more than doubling your money.
But what's interesting here is how compound interest works. Here we go. So you can see that as time goes on, the interest gets exponentially bigger. And the reason why that is, if you know what is because you're earning interest on top of the interest you've already earned. So the longer you have, the more impactful that compound interest is going to be. And that might sound completely obvious. But I just wanted to highlight £100 a month, let's say for a pension. So, but well, rules are changing in a few years. You'll get to retire at 57. It might even be higher by the time a child reaches retirement age. But I've done the same thing, £100 at 57 years, a heck of a long time to invest. I imagine this is going to be somewhere quite comfortably in the millions. There we go, 1.3 million. And again, just to illustrate the why, is you can see the drastic impact that compound interest has. The green bits are just the deposits. So after the age of 25, it really starts to go exponential. And that's why I try and stress to people, the earlier you start, the better. Now, £100 might be too much for some people. Let's go £10 a month. Just £10 a month for a child's pension. That's still pretty good going. Pretty good leg up for when a person reaches that age. But again, you're gonna have to wait a long time for them to actually get access to that money. Any thoughts on that? Is that
I mean, yeah, that orange bit is pretty telling, isn't it? It's really, you know, that it's just the interest on the interest and then on the interest and on the interest, and it just really goes. But it just goes to show, yeah, for 10 quid a month, which is, you know, sort of, even I hardly notice that, and you think actually you could make a proper chunk of money, albeit in quite a lot of years down the line.
Of course, yeah. It's one of those things you can just stick away, put it into a low risk, or maybe not a low risk. No, you really want to go high risk actually, but a high risk passive fund that is really cheap. You know, you can get a really good performing passive fund. And what I mean by passive fund, by the way, is basically a fund that just tracks an index like the FTSE 100, like the S&P 500, which is in America. You could buy a really good tracker fund for 0.10, 0.20, 0.2%, and just leave it running and forget about it. You know, if markets fall like they are at the moment, well, then you've got a heck of a lot of time to make rounds again. So that's what I would suggest. And if you wanted some ideas on platforms that are good for that, let me know. You do have things like Vanguard that are the biggest passive tracker fund platform out there, but you've got others like Moneybox, which, to be honest, are quite expensive. You've got things called not Moneybox, Nutmeg. Moneybox is a far cheaper version. You can invest for as little as £1 a month if you wanted to. So there's lots of different platforms out there. I have actually done a video analyzing all the platforms. It's on my YouTube channel, and I'll send the link after this if you wanted to look through that. But there's plenty of ways to do it out there. Just have a Google. But if you want my help with that, let me know.
Do you have a sort of comparable chart in terms of cost of living? Because it all looks very, very healthy, even at £10 a month. But that's at today's prices, so to speak. We can get excited about £1 million, but in 20, 30 years' time, that £1 million isn't going to go as far as £1 million today. So I just wanted to know whether there's a comparable, obviously retrospectively, because we can't anticipate, well, maybe do, but is there a similar kind of graph that shows you what the I don't know, the RPI or whatever is used to illustrate the increase in the cost of day-to-day living?
There might be. I imagine that calculation would be rather complex because you're adding in compound interest and then taking away inflation, and you have no idea what inflation is going to be. But there might be a calculator out there that does that. I will certainly have a look and get back to you. I haven't seen one personally, but I'm sure there is somewhere.
Yeah, maybe it's not necessarily looking forward, but in terms of historically what has happened to, for example, if someone had invested 20 years ago and what that money is in numbers, but also how that money, the value of that fund, given the rate of inflation.
Yeah, okay.
So just a historical illustration, just because I think you can get carried away. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying that, we're always face something that's going to perform better than, just sticking money in the bank or in savings. So, but it does eat into that amount, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. Just in the interest of time, what I'll do is I'll go away after this and I'll try and find something that shows that, and I'll email it through to everyone, if that's okay. I'm sure there is something I can Google right now, probably, but it'll probably take me 5-10 minutes to find it. So I'll search for it and send it through after, if that's okay. But no, that's a very good question. Okay, so that's junior ISAs for you. Very quickly again, Blue Peter, this is something I prepared earlier. Got pros and cons. You've got pros and cons of each. of each wrapper. Family friendly investing, of course it is. Tax efficient, as I've just explained, great for educational planning. Not necessarily for private school fees, because again, they won't have access, but maybe for university. Anyone can gift into an ISA. So your grandparents, your neighbor, a randomer down the road, whoever you want, anyone can contribute to your child's ISA. It doesn't just have to be you. And also, I think it teaches the child how to invest and the importance of it. It gets them, I guess, interested, if you can use that word, into how to invest, where to invest, different types of companies. You know, it might get them spurred on to then continue that later on as they get older. So again, it's an educational piece for the child, isn't it? You could get them involved in small ways.
Can I ask, is that ISA, is that sort of locked to that child's name? You can't,
Yes.
the parent can't access it, and it's or withdraw from it. It can only be that child. Well, when they reach 16, it then transfers into their name, etc., etc.
That's it. Yeah, the parents can't access it. It is legally the child's. And that's why I say, you know, who do you want to have control of that money? You know, that's an important factor to consider, because again, you might want to actually say, no, I want to have that control. Therefore, it's probably better for you to build up your own ISA and earmark some money for them instead of just giving them that money.
Quickly, David, sorry, with the you mentioned sort of grandparents and stuff, does that come out on, how does that work for capital gains? Presumably it's not, it doesn't save them, it doesn't, if you're putting in 9 grand or whatever to all your grandchildren's ISAs, is that still, is that potentially exempt?
No, it's not potentially exempt, because it's an ISA. It's not a pair. It's just a tax-free allowance that you can, an additional tax-free allowance you can utilize. There's no capital gains on ISAs. Okay. So it doesn't count towards that, which is why it's so good. You know, it's more money out of your estate. You know, cons, I say 18, and then there's annual cap, as we've said. So we've covered that off. Just conscious of time, I've got 20 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get through all this as quick as I can, because there's a bit more to cover. We've then got junior pensions. I mentioned some of this already. 2,880, which is then grossed up, because the way a pension works is you get tax relief on the way in, depending on what income tax band you're in. A child would obviously be a basic rate taxpayer, or wouldn't be a taxpayer at all, but he or she would still get that 20% relief going in, which is how it's grossed up to 3,600. Now, once the money's in, again, it's completely tax-free, and at the age of 57 or whatever age the government is stipulated at that time, what that child can then do is get 25% of that pot as a tax-free cash lump sum, go away and spend it how he or she likes to, wants to, and then out the other end, once they start drawing down and taking income, it's then taxable. Again, at their income tax rate, which would be 20%. The other good thing about this is pensions and junior pensions are all wrapped into what's called a master trust. So effectively, if God forbid anything was to happen to that child, the money will pass on to any beneficiary, let's say another brother or sister or cousin or whoever, completely free of tax. So pensions are always a fantastic estate planning tool for that purpose. And that's a 75-year rule that pensions have. Another good way of saving, another allowance to utilize for you as a parent, take money off the table away from the tax man. and invest it how you wish. Any questions on that? Pretty straightforward, I know. But I guess the good thing about this is that, let's say you're come out an adult pension. If you're a higher or additional rate taxpayer, you're going to get 40 or 45% relief going in, which is massive. And then the idea being is that once you're at retirement age, you want to be under the 50 grand threshold, which is where you start paying more than 20%. So effectively, you're getting 20 or 25% additional extra going in. Yes, you're paying tax on the way out, but you've got that you've got that additional gross roll up going in. So pensions are the most tax efficient wrapper out there, bar none. You can also do other clever things. I know I mentioned this to you, Anna, the other day. So you can actually put commercial property into pensions as well. And you can loan against the value of the pension up to 50%. So I think when sometimes you think of pensions, you think of this kind of restricted thing that, I can't get access to it, can't really do much with it. No, it is actually very flexible. So if you wanted to put some commercial property and the property, loan against it, have that in there, the rent's all then free of tax, and you can have that to supplement retirement income when you're older. Probably not really useful for a junior pension because you can't really put much into it, but it's something that pensions allow. Any questions?
Go
on, Anya.
Is it any child, or does it have to be your own child?
It can be any child. It can be any child. You can pay into the junior pension, yeah, if you wanted to. Grandparents, that's good to do. But yeah. Okay, so you've got pros and cons. Pros, obviously, power of compounding, as we mentioned earlier. Tax efficient, tax rebate on contributions. Gives the child a head start. And again, teaches the child about investing and patience. And as we've already discussed, can't access to retirement and capital under contributions. So that pretty much is pensions for you. We've done the compounding bit. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit more complex, because what you can also do, we'll talk about trust, and then we'll come on to the impact of gifting. Bare trusts. You can put in an unlimited amount into a bare trust. A bare trust is basically the sole owner will be the child and that beneficiary, and that cannot change. The other types of trusts that you can look at are discretionary trusts, whereby you have trustees and they give discretion in terms of who accesses that money and when. So with bare trusts, they are theirs, and they turn their when they're 18, it's automatically theirs. But really, the issue with bare trust, it really needs to come from a grandparent, because something called the settler interest rules won't apply. So you have these trust registration forms, basically. And if anyone puts money into a bare trust for the children, if it's in cash, you don't need to register it. But if it's in stocks and shares, you do. So there are new rules coming out this year by the 1st of September that says that every trust needs to be registered unless it's in cash. And I'll go through this, and just please ask any questions along the way. The reason why you don't want to have a discretionary trust, you want to have a bare trust, i.e. solely in a child's name, is because discretionary trusts have what's called £100 rule. So if that trust is earning income over £100, you then need to start paying tax, and it triggers the registration. So what you need to do is register with UTR, which is for tax purposes, and then you pay income tax, but that's only for discretionary trusts and not bare trusts. And the other thing is children can reclaim the tax if it's from the grandparents, but if it's from the parents, the allowances can't be used, so it's taxed at the parents' trust rate. So hopefully you're following that, but basically everyone has an allowance. Everyone has an income tax allowance of 12,570. So you don't pay income tax until you go over that amount. You've also got a capital gains tax allowance of 12,300. So if you were to realize a gain off an asset or a property, you don't pay tax up until that amount. However, with a discretionary trust, those rules don't apply because it's based on the parents. Who made up these rules? I don't know. Trust rules can be extremely complex, but trusts have to pay that tax first. So you fill out what's called an R185 form. But if the money is gifted from the grandparents, that won't happen. So if grandparents want to pay for the children's education or whatever it might be, bare trusts are the way forward, because you get to utilize the child's allowances. Often what happens is parents put property into trust for the children, which could be good. But the beneficiary or the child is absolutely entitled to the income. Yeah. Obviously, if the income is less than the personal allowance, no tax needs to be paid. And then the beneficiary, it is on them to report the income to HMRC, whether or not it's paid to them at all or not. That's gone through quite a bit there. I want to stop there just because I don't want to talk too much. Does that all kind of make sense? Please do say if it doesn't.
It's a bit complicated, but essentially it's a way of getting using the child's tax-free allowances.
Yes.
But while still keeping the money
Exactly
separate from the actual child, and sort of keeping the control in a manner that, as you said, whether it's discretionary or whatever, but you can.
Yes.
So here's all the money which will use your child's allowances as long as it's come from the grandparents, but we'll still keep the control away from the children.
Yes. Exactly right. So all you got to think of is, for children, discretionary trusts are not ideal. You've got to go down a bare trust, and it's even better, or it's ideal that you want to use a trust if you've got grandparents and you put it into bare trust. Let's keep it super simple. So because normally what happens is a bare trust is not a settlement for IHT purposes. Okay, so there'd be no, it's not relevant property, so no, because normally what you get with trusts is you've got exit charges and 10-year tax charges, if you know about that. That doesn't happen with a bare trust. And a lifetime gift isn't a potentially exempt transfer, so there's no entry on the charge. So really good, obviously surviving 7 years with the gifting rules, you could put a heck of a load of money into a trust, or the grandparents could, and it will all sit outside the estate for tax purposes. So far more complex than an ISA or a junior pension, but it does have its place. With kind of more kind of estate planning or gifting, gifting property away. So we've got pros and cons. As I say, you've got a big IHT saving if you wanted to get some money out of your estate, no cap on contributions, access the money, ideal for school fees. But obviously the child's then entitled to all assets, and it says not ordinarily tax-free. So you might have to pay some tax at some point. It's a bit of a, but quite a lot to get through there. Any questions on bare trusts at all? Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing that we need to talk about, and is not on these slides. I'll actually no, it is actually. Here we go. Things to consider. What I put it in somewhere. So things to consider, and on top of what I've just spoken about. Now we've got gifting rules. So if you wanted to, as a parent or whoever, you have a gifting allowance of three, and that this is completely outside the realm of the tax wrappers. You have a gifting allowance of £3,000 per year. If you haven't used the previous year, you can use that. So 6,000, and that's per parent. So you could gift that cash to a child that doesn't that gets out outside of your estate, and it doesn't hit that 7-year rule. So if I was to gift 100 grand to someone, that 7-year rule then starts to apply, and anything after 7 years, you don't pay any IHT on. So if people have heard of that 7-year rule, hopefully you have. You've also got gift for weddings, and you've got small gifts of £250 as well. The grandparents, and again, this is another interesting thing, can pay for school fees, which is unlimited. So if you've got a whacking great private school fee bill, grandparents can pay that, and you don't have to, and that sits outside the estate, and you don't pay any IHT on that. So if you've got grandparents around, and if they've got the money, fantastic idea to utilize that. Now, finally, now this is where it gets a little bit hazy really, and a bit grey, is that you can gift out of regular income. Now, this needs to be a regular payment, and HMRC needs to see there's a pattern. Okay. But what you really need to do is get an accountant to prove that this income covers your usual living costs. You need to disclose it to HMRC. And if you want to know the form, it's called IHT 403. And on that form, you then write down the gifts you've made. So what a lot of people do is they gift out of the bonuses. So if you come into a big bonus and you want to gift that away to a child, you can do. And you can combine this with your other allowances. So the £12,570 income tax allowance that I mentioned earlier, and the £12,300 CGT allowance. So what you could do is you could pay for a child's rent each month, because that's regular. The HMRC will say that's regular gifting. It's come out of regular income. So you can gift, so you can essentially pay for a child's rent, and that can be classed as gifting for IHT. Most put money just in the savings account, but just as a stipulation, as things do always change, the Office of Tax Simplification is looking into that. So those rules might change, but I wouldn't expect it to change anytime soon.
Can you just gift into a child's account?
Yeah, so you can gift into a savings account, indeed, a child savings account, but you need to prove that it's regular payments. You can't just do a one-off big payment. HMRC really do like to crack down on this. Now, the final thing to note, and I had this the other day with a client, and he said, I had a house gifted to me from my dad, lived there 7 years, but he still lived in the property. That gift has actually failed. So the value of that property, it's called reservation of benefit rules, will still add to the value of this estate, even though he gifted it and it's after the 7-year rule. So what happens is, if you were to gift a house, you can't still regain benefit from that asset. You could live in it, but what you would have to do is you'd have to pay market rent. And HMRC are extremely hot on this. You'd have to get a survey around. They would assess how much rent you need to pay. So when you're gifting, just be extremely mindful of that. You cannot still reserve benefit from that asset, from that property. So that's gifting. Does that all make sense to everyone?
One bit that was a bit didn't entirely make sense. And it's sort of gifting from income. I mean, it kind of does, it kind of doesn't. But if you're, I see it makes sense if you get, you know, say 500 grand bonus, as some people do. But you know that you say, right, I'm going to, you know, give 200 grand to each of my kids. Got to say you have 2 kids. You know, and that's, you can see how that's sort of fair enough paying from out of income, but to make it a pattern, presumably you'd have to do that every year, or you know, or how would that stack up, or is it, if it's from a sort of a one-off bonus in your income, can that,
yeah,
will that be sort of allowable? You say, well, clearly that is a you know, that your fair dues paying it out of that income that you don't need for yourself.
That's it. So that's why I say this is a bit of a grey area. What you need to do is you need to get an accountant to sign it off. And if an accountant can prove, look, Adam's come into this large bonus, it clearly covers his usual living costs. Therefore, it's a gift out of regular income. Because you could say to HMRC, look, this is just a one-off bonus that I've got and I want to gift it. But again, it would need sign off from an accountant. So that's where it can get a little bit, you know, murky in terms
of, sure, yeah, no, I have looked into it. It's a bit, it's a tricky one, and you need to pull a lot of information together and talk about your outgoings and all that sort of stuff. So,
indeed. So it can be a bit complex, but it can be done. Can be done. So those are the main gifting rules you've got to start thinking about. You know, we've covered the allowances, we've covered tax implications, accessibility. These are the things you need to consider, and what really is the money for. You know, you need to have goals to plan for. Each specific objective will have pros and cons in terms of which tax wrapper, whatever it is, strategy you use at the end of the day. Now, finally, we've got a couple more minutes left. As we've just said, there are other things to consider. These aren't tax efficient. Well, and premium bonds are, but up to a certain extent. Children's savings accounts, obviously, if you wanted to gift, as we've just said, you can put money into a child savings account, and that's then theirs. It's obviously sitting in cash. Do you want it in cash for the long term? No, not really, because inflation will erode the value of that. And then you've got children premium bonds, which could put up to £50,000 a year. Those winnings are tax-free, yes, and they don't go inside the value of the estate. However, if you were to look at an average interest from a premium bonds, you're probably going to be looking at about 1% a year. You know, you might get lucky and have that £1 million winning, but I don't particularly like premium bonds because I've never heard anyone win more than £25. But if you wanted to put some money into a premium bond, that's obviously there as well. And there's plenty of platforms out there that you can utilize that as well, just to run alongside of the other investments that I've mentioned. And we're pretty much up to 9 o'clock now. So whizzed through that at the speed of light, I felt. Any kind of questions, anything else you want covering before we depart?
David, I've got one for you. I've been listening intently, even though doing the school runs. Let's see if I can get my video back. There's my video. You mentioned Child Tax Fund, which I know is defunct. If I've got an old one, somewhere. Yeah, where do you think it? Where's the best to start looking for it, or what can I do?
Well, so you can just convert it into a junior ISA.
All right. So do I just go to the provider, which I think back then was probably something like Children's Mutual?
I believe it's actually done automatically, although I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd check with the provider, but you can definitely move it into a junior ISA. I think I'm not entirely 100% sure, actually. I'd rather tell you that I wasn't 100% sure if I wasn't, but it either automatically changes into a junior ISA or you can ask them to do it.
No worries. I'll go and have a look. Thanks, David.
No worries at all. Any more for any more?
Not for me, thanks, David. No, there's a lot of stuff there, but
Brilliant. Well,
yeah, thanks, David.
Thanks for coming along. As I say, I'm going to put this recording on